My reaction is Gordon who?
Gordon.
Good. That's always a good response.
All right, well, let's get started. I see we've got people that are joining us, so I welcome you to the governance meeting of the council, and I'm just going to go around asking people to give brief introductions for those who are listening to us online. So my name is Pat Kimball. I am the current chair of the Recovery Council. Gordon.
Want to make sure I'm not on mute. Gordon Smith, I'm the state's director of opioid response. I'm one of Governor Mills' 2 appointments to the council and serve on the governance committee.
Thank you. Ella.
My name is Ella Capin. I'm a research assistant with the Maine Attorney General's office. I'm not a member of the council.
Thank you. Betsy.
Betsy Fitzgerald. I am currently serving as secretary of the council and am representing the county interests.
Thank you. Brendan.
I am Brendan O'Neill with the Attorney General's office, and I am not a member of the council.
Thank you. Haley.
I'm Haley Tranko, also not a council member, also with the Attorney General's office.
Thank you. And Courtney?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Courtney Gary Allen. I'm a person with living experience of substance use and the co-vice chair for the Maine Recovery Council.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. I'm hoping Eric will join us later. And as I said earlier, Mary will join us if she can. So the 3 things that are on our agenda today is to discuss the change in the bylaws in section 4.6, which we had a discussion at the full council, but at their request have brought it back to governance to look at. Then we're going to talk about the maximum size of our subcommittees and council terms and transition to new council. Those are the 3 things on the agenda. Anything to add to that agenda? All right, so let's start with number 1. Section 4.6, and I want to leave this for those who remember. This is the section where it states 3 or more members together constitutes a meeting, but I'm going to leave that to Brendan to explain what we currently have and his recommended changes.
Thanks, Pat. And I should have spoken up a little more quickly, although I didn't, because I'm not sure sort of which way this goes. One additional item, and I'm not sure if it's this committee or the executive committee, or whether it'd be better to just do it at the full council, is just to notify you that, in case you haven't heard, we need to make an amendment to Mary Coyne's contract to authorize, and this is at the direction of the state controller's office, which establishes rules around the use of funds that are in state accounts. The amendment to Mary's contract, to the coordinator's contract, needs to authorize the coordinator to travel on council business as approved by the council, and to be reimbursed for appropriate travel expenses that the council authorizes. Long story short, we have been able to achieve an authorization for Mary to travel, and my understanding is she's all the steps are in place now for her to attend the RX conference in Atlanta which starts on Monday. But I've been instructed to prepare that amendment to her contract as soon as possible, and to get it into place. And I'll work with the council to do that.
Do people have any questions for Brendan on that?
I guess not a question, just more an observation. I mean, that's just common sense. I guess, why do we have to spell it out in a contract? Gosh, there's another hoop. All right.
Because lawyers, Betsy.
Oh, Courtney.
Okay. That's true. I am not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV, so thank you.
Almost
Betsy-
as bad as the other L word.
Betsy,
Uh,
I totally agree with you. When I heard what was happening, I thought, well, this is just okay. But yeah, Courtney, you have your hand up. You have a question.
My question is just, Brandon, what do you need from us? Do you need a motion or something, or just a head nod?
Not right now. I have to, I'm going to be working to put together the motion. I've got plenty of resources to do that. It's going to be, I'm sorry, the contract amendment. It's going to be pretty short, at least as short as I can make it, and have it, pass muster with the controller's office, to the extent that that's necessary, and then I'll send it to the full group, for the group's approval. And, I suppose if the council, anyway, that's the step. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to put it together, and then we'll figure out the right meeting, and it may be the full council meeting, at which that needs to be, adopted.
Okay, great. Can we move on to FOIA?
Say that again, Courtney.
I was just saying, okay, great.
Okay. Yeah, I'm, I feel real bad that it happened. It's one of those things. But the bottom line is that we were able to get Mary to where hi, Mary, we talking about the contract amendment. We were able to get Mary where she needs to go, and I'm very appreciative of Brendan and anyone else who helped that all come about. But making this amendment will certainly be easy. And I think probably the best thing, and I don't think it'll take up much of the meeting, is just have the full council. If we can have it ready for the full council meeting, it's probably, again, as Betsy says, it's a no-brainer. It should just go through, I don't think, without any problem. So
Gordon, did I hear that you were started to have a comment?
I just had a question whether or not the finance or executive committee meet before the 11th. Because if they don't, I think the 11th and the full council meeting is probably the time to get it done. If the intent is do it as fast as we can, the 11th seems to be the opportunity, unless one of those committees is meeting first.
I see Haley is shaking her head no.
Yeah,
Yeah,
unless
okay.
we
Then
call
I
an
think-
executive committee today, I don't think they'll meet. In finance, if I'm right, Haley, is the 29th of April.
Yeah. There's the only committee that meets between now and the full council is the program and grants committee.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think then that knowing that we have to give two weeks notice of these committee meetings, I think the 11th is fine. It's more than we need. If there'd been a probably executive committee could have taken care of it, but it seems like a simple matter, shouldn't take much time on the 11th. So I'm going to assume in my mind that that's probably when this will be taken care of.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll circulate a draft ahead of time.
Great.
Excellent. All right. Well, Brendan, we'll go back to section 4.6 of the bylaws.
Thank you. Haley, do I have ability to share my screen?
You should know.
Okay. Before I get started with my presentation, this is about, again, the sort of 3-person rule in the bylaws. Does anybody want to say anything before I get started? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to share my screen where I have just a handful of slides for convenience. Oops. Okay. All right. So my computer tells me that you are all now looking at a slideshow. The first slide of which says at the top, 1 MRSA section 406 public notice. Is that right?
Yep.
Great. All right. So the issue that I, brought up, it seems prematurely at the last council meeting is whether this 3-person rule, as I construed in the past and as it in the bylaws, is sort of accurately understood under FOA. And what I've got on the slide right here is the actual language of FOA. And I'm sorry, I don't have like a screenshot to prove that it's the actual language, but you're all welcome to pull up this statute, and you'll see that this is the actual language. And so what it says, is that public notice shall be given for all public proceedings if these proceedings are a meeting of a body or agency consisting of 3 or more persons. And the issue is, in the past, I had interpreted this clause in yellow such that 3 or more persons qualified the meeting. So I read it as if this is a proceeding, if the proceeding is a meeting of 3 or more persons. Having taken another look at it and talked to others in my office, I'm now persuaded that the better reading of this clause is that 3 or more persons qualifies the body or agency. So the issue is, if it's a meeting of a body or agency consisting where the body or agency itself consists of 3 or more persons, then the proceeding has to be a public proceeding. And that is sort of the critical difference between the sort of 2 interpretations. But once you start there, you have to then go look at what it means for something to be a public proceeding. And under the definition of FOA, which is section 402, a public proceeding means the transactions of any functions of, any of the following. And there's a list of the kinds of entities FOA applies to. It's my view that, the Recovery Council can be understood to fall under either subparagraphs B or F of subsection 2. And that says it's a board or commission of any state agency or authority, or it's an advisory organization, including, and you can see the word here, council. Advisory, or this F, well, I'm not going to go into that right now, but just for speed, I'll skip that part. So in other words, a public proceeding is the transactions of any functions of these kinds of entities. Trying to understand what a transaction of the function is, you go to the legislative intent of FOA, which is found in the section before, which is section 401. Section 401 of FOA provides for what the legislative intent is. And this is important because this is what guides the courts as they try to understand whether there's been a violation of FOA. In blue, the legislature's intent is that the council's actions be taken openly. And in green here, this is the significant part, and that their deliberations be conducted openly. Now, it doesn't rule out, and we'll get into this, communications that happen outside of a public meeting. But the part that follows here in yellow is really important. It is the further the intent of the legislature that clandestine meetings without proper notice and attendance by the public not be used to defeat the purposes of this subchapter. The way I read that is the purposes of the subchapter are the parts in blue and green. Entities' actions should be taken openly and their deliberations be conducted openly. Section 401 goes on this next slide to say very clearly, does not prohibit communications outside of public proceedings, again, unless those communications are used to defeat the purposes of this subchapter, which we've talked about are open deliberations. This last sentence in section 401 guides the courts. This subchapter shall be liberally construed and applied to give effect to the legislative intent. And when I see language in a statute directing courts to liberally construe the statute, that means that, to me, it means that the public interest in open deliberations is paramount. That's going to be construed quite broadly. And it's going to be the primary guiding principle. And so the courts aren't supposed to narrow that understanding to give effect to, to make it more convenient for the council to operate. So the liberal construction clause is important for what we're doing. So those are, in my mind, the relevant parts of FOA, the three, sort of relevant statutes. I then went to look at what the FOA ombudsman has on their website, which is they've posted a series of FAQs, which are available at this email address. This website address right here. And I provided this to you in the past. You can all pull it up right now. And there's a section specifically about meetings. And so I've just captured two of the questions and their answers. When does a meeting have to be require public notice? The answer pretty much just restates the law. It's if the proceeding is a meeting of a body or agency consisting of 3 or more persons, you'll see that is basically the same as what it says here. So that doesn't provide any additional, I think, gloss. The next question, though, is more helpful. Can members communicate with one another by email outside of a public proceeding? And for these purposes, I'm thinking, I'm reading this more broadly to not be cabined just by email. So, can the Recovery Council communicate with one another outside of a public proceeding is sort of how I'm looking at this. Again, the beginning part of the answer, and the rest of the answer is much longer. It goes on for the next 2 slides. The beginning part of the answer just restates the statute. It doesn't prohibit communications unless those communications are used to defeat the purposes of the Freedom of Access Act. The answer goes on, however, to say here in yellow, email or other communication that is used as a substitute for deliberations or decisions which should properly take place at a public meeting may violate the statute. Public proceedings are defined in part as the transactions of any functions affecting any or all citizens of the state. We've seen that here, the transactions of any functions. Again, chiefly restating what the statute says, but it goes on to say that the underlying purpose of FOA is that proceedings be conducted openly and deliberations and actions be taken openly. Another part of the answer that I find to be helpful is on this last page, and this is the end of the answer posted on the FOA ombudsman's page. This is, non-binding guidance from the ombudsman. Members of a body should refrain from using email as a substitute for deliberating or deciding substantive matters properly confined to public proceedings. And I think I probably, said this before, either in the last meeting or when we've talked about FOA before. Email is, this part in blue is significant. Email is permissible to communicate with other members about non-substantive matters, such as scheduling meetings, developing agendas, and disseminating information and reports. Those last 3 examples are pretty administrative. They're really not coming close to the kind of communications that the council members, it sounded to me, were most concerned about, both when this came up at the Program and Grants Committee and when it came up at the full council. My understanding of those communications, and I understand this, is that, as the council is deliberating and trying to figure out how to put into place procedures and to how to gather information, it needs to, council members need to go out and, for example, in the case of, Gordon Smith and Ben Mann, have discussions within state agencies to figure out the procedures and whether money can be transferred from the AG's office to DHHS. Others have an appropriate interest, I think, in, going out to talk to, potential grantees about whether they can actually carry out what the council wants them to do. I think of those two examples are sort of fact-finding conversations. I have in the past suggested a couple things to the council that, you know, sort of good practices by which the council members can be sure they're sort of complying with FOA is that they bring those fact-finding meetings to committee meetings rather than conducting them on their own. Another suggestion I had was that council members could, to the extent they have to have those fact-finding meetings outside of a committee meeting, they can come back and report and say, here's what our discussions were. Here's what we talked about. Here are the things we ruled out. Here are the things that we ruled in. The better practice, I think, is to, and I would argue the more efficient practice and the speedier practice is just to have the fact-finding meetings in the committee meetings. In other words, bring the agency officials to a meeting and so that everybody can ask their questions and hear the answers. Bring the, potential grantee to the committee meeting to have those discussions and fact-finding and deliberations. And some of that's already begun. The Program of Grants Committee has invited several people to present to the committee, and that those conversations have happened at that level. There's not a lot of case law in Maine interpreting FOA. There is some. Whether a court would agree that a particular discussion by council members with, outside of a public meeting would constitute a violation of FOA. There's just not a ton of case law on that. So a lot of my guidance to the council is in the form of best practices and recommendations about, how to stay, more clearly on the right side of FOA. But there's no bright line that I can give you other than, going back to the intent of FOA, which is deliberations. To the extent that council members are engaging in deliberations, to the extent that council members are engaging in the transactions of any functions of the council, those really need to be had at a public meeting. And because courts are to construe FOA liberally, I would argue that in general, we should also construe the functions of the transactions of functions of the council pretty broadly. And to the extent someone's engaging in just administrative matters that are not affecting those transactions, administrative matters that are not, deliberations of the council, that's one thing. But to highlight or to put a finer point on some of this, as I mentioned a minute ago, I had even in the past, to try to accommodate the council's need to move forward and get its work done, suggested that, council members could go out and have merely fact-finding conversations with the theory that if a council member is just, gathering information so that the council can move its work forward, and that council member brings that information back to the council, that may be okay. However, subsequently, I've found a case from Maine Superior Court from 1992 that specifically found otherwise, that a specific fact-finding meeting that had been held in that case by a public body did violate Section 406 of FOA because it engaged in the gathering of information that fed into the deliberations of that body, and it affected the transactions of the functions of the body. So even that, I mean, that's I think, a pretty strict interpretation, of Section 406. And the court, quite clearly relied on the, again, the liberal construction of FOA, and said, even that fact-finding mission, or that fact-finding meeting, is a public meeting and needs to happen with proper public notice and the ability of the public to participate. I've said a lot. I want to pause and see if folks want to, push back or ask questions or try to get clarification on things. I'm going to leave the slides up in case you want me to go back to a particular slide, but I'm happy to take them down and just rely on my face instead. And I can't see if any hands up. So Pat, I can see you, so I'm going to rely on you to manage this part.
So I don't see any hands up. I don't think.
I have my hand up. Hi,
There we
Brendan.
go.
Hi,
Okay.
Courtney.
That was a lot. Can you attempt to put everything that you just said into layman's terms
Yeah. So going
and
back,
summarize it? What
so
does it mean?
yeah. So going back to the bylaws, the issue is in Section 406, the opening sentence says public notice shall be given of all meetings of 3 or more council members. That sentence complies with FOA technically, because a meeting of 3 or more members does in fact need to be a public meeting, but it's not accurate because a meeting of 2 or more council members might also be a public meeting. And so my recommendation, to cut to the chase, is that we delete that first sentence. But as we know, the council was concerned about that at the last meeting. The challenge here is the council's got to balance its work, which is one part of its work is to be transparent. Another part of its work is to get the money out the door and to put the money into effect to address the opioid crisis. And there won't be, I'm going to be, working to help the council move its work forward, balancing those two interests. And I'm not always going to have, I'm not always going to have like an ability to write down clear examples of what you can do and what you can't do. But in general, the idea is that if you're engaging in deliberations, let's put this part back here. If you're engaging in something that you think realistically could be deliberations that affects the transactions of any functions of the council or its committees, I think your instinct as a council member should be to have those discussions in a public meeting.
Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna push back a little bit, and I do this with all the respect that you deserve, Brendan. But I feel like this is the type of change to the interpretation of FOIA that upends political processes across the state of Maine. And so if the legislature is bound by FOIA, how do they hold caucuses every single morning with 50 plus members of the body deliberating? And they definitely do deliberation in those caucuses. And I just, unless I have an opinion from the attorney general or a court case that says this, then I'm just not going to vote for this, because I don't understand how. And for the record, transparency is, I'm probably one of the loudest, most obnoxious people on this council about transparency. Of course we need to be transparent, but I also need to be able to talk to Betsy, I'm using you randomly, about what she sees as her top priorities before I get into a meeting. I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but this is a massive shift in the interpretation of FOIA. And if I can't talk to a council member on this body, then I can't talk to a council member on my city council body either. Okay, I'm done.
So can I ask a clarifying question? to this. So if what I'm hearing is throw out the three. So say I'm, for instance, at a meeting, either a subcommittee meeting or a council meeting, and we're doing some research on a subject. And I say, I'll say, and I'm throwing them out. Betsy, Courtney, and I will do the research on this, and we're going to bring it back to the full council. For Courtney, Betsy, and I to do research and bring information back to the council to deliberate on a decision is totally within the transparency of a public meeting. Am I correct with that?
So I'm going to start with Courtney's questions,
Okay.
just because they came in order of precedence. Courtney, I am definitely aware of the fact that different lawyers in Maine interpret FOA differently. There's also not, as I mentioned before, not a ton of case law from courts guiding us on this. And I'm aware that different authorities in Maine provide different guidance on this section of FOA. I'm not going to weigh in on how the legislature does things. I'm not going to weigh in on how another body does things. My guidance here is for the council and how the council operates. I'm not aware of any case that has challenged, the example you gave of, the legislature's, process. The case I referred to before from 1992 was a challenge to a city council and its meeting. And so, I'm going on the authorities that I have available to me. And, if other bodies in the state interpret it differently, that I think will happen from time to time with different laws and different and in different circumstances. But I am comfortable with this, that this interpretation is how my office, looks at the application of FOA. Having said that, I'm saying this from the staff level. What I'm saying does not, because there's an official process for this, what I'm saying does not constitute, an official legal opinion of the Attorney General, because that's a whole thing that there's a process for it. So my guidance is, as legal counsel, as the attorney, assigned to provide legal counsel to the Recovery Council.
Okay, yeah, I totally understand that, Brendan, and thank you. And with all due respect, I reject your guidance unless there is guidance from the Attorney General as an official guidance from the Attorney General that FOIA has changed and everyone needs to change their processes.
So Courtney, can I just can I just follow up on that for a second?
Yeah.
And this is not intended to be an exercise to obtain your agreement with my position, but I want to make sure I understand, your position on this. I'm just going to share my screen again just to put up the statute again. Let me know when you can see it.
I can see it. Thank you, Brendan.
So the critical part of my interpretation is the part in yellow here. And I just want to understand if you're reading that clause in a way that's different from how I had read it.
The first bullet point?
Correct. Yeah, the first bullet point.
Public notice shall be given to all public proceedings as defined in section 402. I don't have 402 in front of me, but if these proceedings are a meeting of the body or agency consisting of 3 or more people. So the way I read that is that if me, Gordon, and Betsy get together and we're talking about substantive matters, that is a public proceeding. I don't read that as if I call Gordon to ask him, I don't know what the thing is, but something substantive. I read that as I'm allowed to have conversations one-on-one with fellow council members. I mean, I've been doing that my entire elected career, and so has everybody else. So if that is not the case, then everyone is violating FOIA. And we need to completely shift our understanding of politics in Maine. I just feel like this is like bigger than just this council or this one legal opinion. And I just can't agree with it without further guidance. I don't know. I'm sorry, Brendan.
No, you certainly don't need to apologize. Again, with the language up on the screen, I just want to say again, the way I read the clause in yellow is, if these proceedings are a meeting of a body or agency consisting of 3 or more persons, the way I read it is the body or agency is what consists of 3 or more persons rather than the meeting. So the clause 3 or more persons qualifies the body or agency. So in other words, to kind of reread this, public notice should be given for all public proceedings if these proceedings are a meeting of a body or agency that consists of 3 or more persons, not that the meeting is 3 or more persons.
I got you. I understand what you're saying. Well, it's a very interesting legal analysis that would impact a lot of things. And also, I feel like I would need to see if a legal opinion from somebody, from a Supreme Court justice or from the Attorney General's office or somebody.
And there's also, I also want to sort of drill down a little bit on the current language in the bylaws. And I think the sort of understanding that I had previously that we're talking about, the current language in the bylaws is public notice shall be given of all meetings of 3 or more council members. So the corollary to that is if it's 2 council members, that does not require a public meeting. That's what that clause says. So under this current language in the bylaws, 3 or more council members would require a public meeting. I mean, the effect of this change is to simply reduce that from 3 to 2, I think. And so it would mean that we all agree, and, I can't state it enough, that while these transparency requirements are incredibly important, they're also cumbersome, and they make it difficult to get the council's work done. Those requirements were on any meeting of 3 or more persons of the council. I think the significance of the change is that now it's going to be on 2 or more persons of the council.
Right, which means I can't call Betsy, right?
Correct. Unless what you're talking about is, more administrative and not, something that you would, fairly think of as, deliberating about the work of the council.
Okay, well, I just will vote no, and the rest of the body can decide what to do with that.
And that's, I totally understand. Let me just ask, do you have any other questions, or do you want me to go into any more about, I mean, I can pull up, the definitions or any other part if you want to go through it again.
I mean, could you send this to me in an email? Is that allowed? I don't know.
Well, yeah, because I mean,
cases that you're referencing, I would like to read them. I would be actually very interested.
Yeah, I should have said at the outset, because these slides are being presented at a public meeting, we are going to, have to post them to the website and circulate them to the council. I didn't do so beforehand because, frankly, I prepared them last night and this morning. But yes, these are going to be public. We'll post them to the website and I'll distribute them to everybody. You should also know that I haven't, these are direct quotes of the statute. You can also, all I mean to say is You can also, pull up the statute and you'll find the same language there. And the FOA,
Okay.
the FOA administrator or ombudsman's website, these are all just direct quotes.
Okay,
But
I
I'll certainly
talked way too
circulate the
much, so I
slides.
apologize. Everybody else can talk now.
Pat, can you remind me of your question?
So my question is this, because I'm just trying to figure it. So if we're meeting, if members of the council are meeting to collect information to bring to a meeting, say for instance, we're in a subgroup and somebody says, oh, we need some research on this. And Betsy, and again, I'm just using names, I'm looking, Betsy and Courtney and I say, oh, we'll meet, gather that information together, bring it back to the group for voting. Does that type of meeting have to be a public meeting?
Based on this court case I found, I think the answer is yes. I mean, I
Okay.
think you think of it along the lines of scoring of grant
Mhm.
applications. So a model, the typical model, I think, as I understand it, is when you score a grant application, you do so individually. And then you get together as a committee to discuss and you do consensus scoring. The consensus score, if the council were to be doing the scoring, individual council members could do the scoring at home on their own, and that doesn't have to be public. But when you gather as a group, 2 members, 3 members, to do consensus scoring, that should be a public meeting.
Okay. The second
At
question.
least that's my recommendation. I think that would be the best practice. So to play your example out, I think if that were a real life example, my suggestion would be, because there's no case on point on that, I would suggest you guys go off and do your individual research and, email the results of your research to everybody on the committee, and then come to the committee and discuss it as a threesome, as a group.
Yep. So here's my other example. If I meet with Bruce and Courtney to discuss responsibilities of their role as co-chairs in my role, is that constitute a public meeting? Or can the 3 of us meet to discuss the roles of those positions?
So let me share my screen one more time. Because I'm just, showing what I would refer back to. Now, again, the ombudsman's guidance is not binding on anybody. It's guidance. But, I think it's relevant. Here on the screen, the part in blue describes non-substantive matters that are, fine for, like, how did she phrase it? Email or communication that takes place outside of a public meeting. So these are examples: scheduling meetings, developing agendas, and disseminating information reports. These are pretty administrative. What you're describing is more procedural, I think. It could be administrative, but it could be procedural. And in my world, procedure often affects substance, and procedure often affects outcomes. And my recommendation would be that kind of conversation happen at a governance committee meeting.
Okay.
In other words, like it would be, there are other members of the council who may have an interest in that conversation. Members of the public may have an interest in that conversation, and I can foresee that. And so I would recommend that kind of discussion happen at a committee meeting.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for Brendan on this? If not, I am looking to see, so as counsel to the council, as Brendan's role is to advise us legally, for the work of the council. I'm looking to see if this governance wants to take a stance on the recommended change of our legal counsel to our bylaws.
And is that recommendation to delete from our bylaws the yellow highlighted language that I've seen?
The language to delete is not in any of the slides, Gordon. But I'll read it to you. It's on,
Okay.
it's in section 4.6 of the bylaws, notice of meetings. The first sentence of that section says, public notice shall be given of all meetings of 3 or more council members. The section goes on to say, notice of all meetings shall be made in such a manner as to comply with Maine's FOA and provides a statutory site. My recommendation is to delete the first sentence and have the section begin instead with notice of all meetings shall be made in such a manner as to comply with Maine's FOA.
I move that language. I move that we recommend as a governance committee to the full council the changes recommended by council by our as read by Brendan.
Do I hear a second on that?
Yes, you do.
Thank you, Betsy.
Yeah, I had to find the button.
Do I hear any further discussion? If not, can you call a roll, please?
Yes. Betsy Fitzgerald?
Yes.
Courtney Gary Allen?
No.
Pat Kimball?
Yes.
Eric's not with us. Gordon Smith?
Yes.
So that's 3, so it carries.
All right, thank you very much. And we will pass that on to the full council for discussion and vote.
Will that be on the April 11th agenda? And will there be opportunity for discussion so I can explain my dissent?
Yeah, what I'm looking at, Courtney, is I'm trying to decide how full that agenda is, because the priority really needs to be about the work of the grants committee, talking about contract change. So let me look that agenda over. And if not,
That's fine with me. Either way, I don't care which meeting it's at. I just want a little bit of notice so I can prepare my remarks on dissent.
Yeah, I will give you plenty of time. And again, I want to be able to give, because the committee really struggles with understanding their role in trying to abide by the Freedom of Information Act. It may be, I want to be able to give them a longer conversation, and I'm not sure our agenda in April will do that. So I'll look it over again, and I will give sufficient notice. But I'm in my head, I'm looking at that agenda. It's pretty full. And those are priorities, the contracts and the application and some other conversations need to get moving. Not that this isn't important, but I have to put them in some sort of order. So, but I will give you plenty of time. And I will also in our report that it was not unanimous from the governance committee. So, all right. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the discussion of maximum committee size. I think when we looked at our bylaws and how the committees worked, we didn't know how many people wanted to be part of a committee. And it was Courtney who brought it to our attention that technically with no maximum size, the subcommittee can make a majority of the council, which could lead to some issues in regards to votes. So I'm opening it up for discussion about if you want to discuss and change the bylaws in regards or add into the bylaws a recommended maximum size of subcommittees. I see Brendan's hand and then Courtney.
I'm happy to defer, Courtney, if you want to go first.
Just quickly, I was thinking about this and I thought there's actually maybe two ways that the committee could decide to go with this. One being instituting a maximum committee size. I would suggest 7 just because it's odd number and it's lower than 9. Or you can open it up to any council member that wants to be on the committee, because I don't think there's any, I mean, it's just more meetings, but I don't think that you can either limit it to 9, which constitutes a vote, and exclude other people without allowing people. I don't know if I'm making sense. So I think there's 2 different options. 1, let everybody be a part of it who wants to be a part of it, or 2, limit it to 7, excuse me.
Thank you. Ben?
This may, inform your discussions, but looking at section 6.1 of the bylaws, I just want to note that the authority of the committees, I would argue that the committees, for what it's worth, do not have the authority to make decisions as the council. Looking at section 6.1, it says that the council may establish such committees as it deems appropriate to assist and recommend in the management of the council. The way I read that is that if you have 9 members of the council on a committee and they vote, the committee votes to recommend something to the council, that vote does not constitute a vote of the council, and does not create any conflict with any vote that happens at the council level. That doesn't, it's not meant to speak to kind of the reality of the fact that if somebody votes for something at the committee level, they may or may not vote for it at the full council level. But it's entirely possible that, when it gets to the full council level, the deliberation of the non-committee members, the addition of the deliberation of the non-committee members may, influence the outcome about whether the recommendation gets adopted or not. But it doesn't, I don't read the committee's vote would create an issue for the council in terms of its vote. The other point I would make is, to the extent that you have so many members of the council who want to be on a committee, that, you sort of run into this question. It raises the question of whether the issue is so important that the deliberation should be at the council level. But that's not a legal issue. That's really, I think, management and for the council to decide. I'll leave it there. I had some other thoughts, but those are 2.
Gordon and then Betsy.
I don't feel that strongly about this, but I don't, my personal preference would be not to make any change. I mean, standard parliamentary procedures allows committees of the whole that could include the entire council. And I prefer that any member of the council that wants to be on any committee have that opportunity. If I'm on the grants committee and there's 9 of us, my vote, Brendan has said it well, my vote at the committee level might well change at the council level after the discussion of the council. So I frankly don't care if all 15 members of the council are on the grants and programs committee. I really don't see a legal problem with this. As Brendan says, it's really a management issue, how we manage the affairs of the council, and I don't feel that strongly about it, but that's my preference.
Thanks, Gordon. Betsy.
Well, I think we do this now. We just finished talking about a change in the bylaws, and we said, well, now we have a recommendation that goes back to the full council. We're doing that now.
Right.
I guess I understand what Courtney's saying, but I think it's a non-issue.
Me too.
I tended to
So
agree.
is it the will of the group that anyone who wants to be on a committee can be on a committee,
The
or to
committees
not limit it?
the committees are appointed, and right now there's no limit according to the bylaws. Subcommittees are appointed by the chair. Brendan?
Let me just, just for the sake of reminding everybody, the bylaws provides that the committees are appointed in the following way, that the chair annually appoints the members subject to the approval by the council members, unless the council specifies by resolution an alternative method of naming members of the committees. And further, in appointing committee members, the chair shall take into consideration the diverse interests represented in the council. So all that to just point out that there's, while the chair has a role, the council also has a role. And there's, language in section 6.2 that, cabins, to some degree, the composition of the committees.
So I think I hear from people that we are satisfied with the way it currently is written and the way we're currently doing business according to our bylaws. Is that the consensus of what I'm hearing?
And
think
Courtney
so.
dissents. Sorry. I don't think it's appropriate for 9 members of the committee to constitute a vote pretty much on any committee, unless you are going to allow every committee member to be a part of the committee. And Pat has told me I'm not allowed to be on the grants committee because I'm on other committees, so I don't feel like it's fair. So I dissent. It's fine.
So if I can clarify, the decision to do that was that I'm trying to make in managing committees, I was trying to make them workable. And so what I did was make decisions, and I didn't think it was, in my opinion, as a chair, to be on every committee. There's no one that serves on every committee except the chair. And that may change. I only do it now out of trying to keep in my head what's going on and balancing it. But that was the decision that I made. It certainly is the way we work. Any person, any member of the committee can attend any subcommittee that they want. So, but that's the way things are. So again, I'm just looking, it was brought up that the governance committee needed to look at the maximum size of committees and to see if there was going to be a recommended change. And I'm hearing that with the dissension of Courtney, I'll call a vote if you want to, but the recommendation is that we make no change. And if someone wants to make a motion that we make no change, we can do it. Other than that, we can just do it by consensus that we're going to leave the bylaws the way they are.
Consensus.
I guess we're going to move forward.
And did we schedule this meeting for an hour, Pat?
For an hour and a half.
Oh, okay. Okay. I have a few more minutes then, because I
Okay.
do think the most important issue might well be the next one. So I may only have like 15 minutes, but I'll stay with you as long as I can.
Okay, I don't think that this conversation is going to end today, but it has brought to the attention of all of us. And I actually had a brief conversation about the Attorney General with it, is the concern that all members of the council term off at the same time, that there was no rotation in that. And so in transitioning from one council to another, we literally could have a whole new council in 2 years. I mean, again, people move on, and there may be one or two, but there was a concern that everybody terms off at the same time, which leaves, I think, for functioning purposes, there's been some concern expressed. So I just wanted to open up this discussion as to how we should move forward with this, and do our research. And I believe, and Brendan can correct me on this, I believe if we decide to touch this in any way, this is in statute. And so we'll need some help with that. But we first have to decide what we want to do.
It's in the MOU, which is a court order.
Well, what was there not, Brendan, in the statute that was passed that simply added those additional legislative people? Is there no
Yes.
language in that statute regarding terms? I mean, isn't it really an issue for both the statute and the MOU?
Gordon, as I see the let's see, if somebody else wants to talk, I'm pulling up the statute. My short answer to Gordon is I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
I-
it's a question of the MOU as well. I guess you could stagger the terms of the 4 seats that the legislature appointed, though I don't think I would be in favor of that. I don't know if I want to be messing around in statute or MOUs. I'd have to think more about that. Seems challenging.
Well, you can't really mess around with the MOU without going back to subdivisions, as I understand it.
Correct.
So, I mean, I think the short answer to this for now, at least my preference would be, because we have so much other substantive business to do to get our money out the door, that given that I've said before that when the terms come due this fall, the same appointing authorities will be in place that appointed the 15 of us. So I do not think that there is a danger of all 15 people being replaced at the same time. To the contrary, you'd be more likely to have all the people reappointed. So I'm willing to honestly leave it to the next cohort of after these reappointments in the fall, partly because again we'll have the same attorney general, same governor, same legislative leadership, and and presumably the same people making decisions on behalf of the subdivisions. I'm not sure about that last one. So I mean, I just would be willing to defer this, partly because whatever the solution is, if we have to make a change, it's going to take some time to do that, because amending the MOU is not going to be an easy process, nor amending the statute if that was the choice. So that would just be my preference, is to defer, to recognize that, yep, it is a risk, but it's not a very high risk right now. And I would defer for several months while we do our other work.
I can agree with that. Any other thoughts on that?
I'm fine with that. I just mostly wanted to raise it because I didn't want to see 15 whole new people in 3 years, not sure how to walk yet, and have no historical knowledge except for the staff. So not a big deal. The problem might also be sort of resolved in November. Like, some people might just not want to do this again. Me actually being one of them. I haven't made my decision, but I start law school in the fall, and this is a lot. So there could just be some of us that say, no, thank you, and maybe come back another time to support a future council in their transition to new leadership.
Got it.
I do want to point out, and this I don't think is relevant to the decision one way or the other, that relying on the staff, I think, makes a lot of sense, except for the fact, well, not except for the fact, but just note that our staff seem to keep having the problem of going to law school. And the longevity is always going to be, you know, we will work with that.
We could always prohibit that, but I don't think that'd be a very good idea.
Yeah, I mean, because, you know, Courtney, it would certainly be a huge loss for the council, for you. I also know that Eller is leaving, and I know that Haley is leaving. It's giving me great anxiety.
Haley and I had our first day the other day. It was great. We had tax class.
Well, I
In
will
case
have some time with.
anyone's wondering, the government
yeah.
will take your money always.
Yeah, I know, and I knew that.
I will be spending some time with Mary in Atlanta. I'll make the profession seem as detrimental as possible in my continuing work with Mary and others on the council.
You put
And
in
I'm
the
sorry
chat.
that my comment inappropriately did not include Mary as a staff member. I was thinking, too narrowly, and I apologize for that.
But Mary wrote
Yeah,
in the chat, don't worry.
Yeah, I will not be
I
going to law
haven't
school,
fully-
so I'll be here.
I haven't fully decided. I've made my schedule so that I will get through my term, and we'll just see how actually brutal law school is August, September, and October. And one thing at a time, one day at a time. That's what they tell you.
That's what they tell you. It's a good thing. So, all right. Well, I think we have done all the business that is before the council. I will ask one quick question. A question came up at the council meeting about spending limits. Is that something that belongs in finance to do a procedure in regards to decisions on spending limit? And it came up with making decisions about sending Mary to the national conference. Does that really have to be part of the council process, or should there be some sort of procedure in regards to below a certain amount, somebody else can approve it without being full council approval? Does that belong in finance? Yeah, I'm going to put it in finance then. Okay. All right. If there's no other business before the council, before this group, we are going to adjourn. I leave you all to your day. Hopefully it gets better weather-wise. Gordon, drive careful. And thank you. And I'm going to watch hockey all afternoon, so I'm happy. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
thank you.
Bye.